Good morning, Mission Church. How are we? Good. Friends, I just want you to know, this feels like such an immense honor to stand on this stage. That after traveling around and going to other places this summer, that I get to land back here in my church family. And let me just say, as somebody who's grown up here, who started coming as a 16-year-old, I'm looking out at this room, and some of these faces I've known since I was a teenager, and others of them I've never met you. And so that's a testament that this special place that feels like home is ever expanding. And this place, it feels like home, feels like family. And if you know a little bit of my story, you know over the past 2 days, it's been a kind of a hard 2 days for me, and I needed my family, and this family showed up for me in beautiful ways. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful to be here. Something you also would maybe know about me, if you knew my story, is that a few years back, I was kind of walking through this internal struggle. Like there was this wrestling that was happening in my soul. And what you also need to know about me is I'm like the biggest extrovert that's ever existed, like no joke. So I'm looking out at you all like you're already my best friend. And because of that, I'm going to actually read part of my journal to you. I hope that's okay with you. We're there in that relationship. We're there. And so I want to read this part of my journal to you because this is where I was at a few years back. Here's what I wrote. I said, I am tired. I am worn down and worn out and tired of having to do things. I want to live, not just strive and work my life away. I know that I'm working for something great, but I can't even see it anymore because I'm bogged down with distractions, my own failings, my own need to earn something. But I don't even know what that something is. I just want to live. I want to live the life that Jesus describes for me, fully alive, but I just feel stressed and scared and like I need to prove myself in so many areas. I'm so tired of striving. I'm so tired of proving myself. Why can I not just rest in you? Why am I so burnt out? What did I do wrong, and how do I fix this? Anyone ever been there? I was exhausted at a soul level. I was burnt out. I was tired. And I didn't know how to resolve it. I didn't have all the answers, so I just felt like I was left screaming out, man, why can I not find rest? And I would bet I'm not the only person who asked that question, right? And I think it's kind of interesting. In this culture we find ourselves living in, I kind of feel like we're in this age of paradox in many ways. Because on one end, it seems that we've never had more access to teaching about the reasons why we should rest, right? Like every podcast you've listened to has talked about rest, right? Like every blogger you follow talks about it. Like every Instagram page gives you like the 4-step plan to being like a rested person, right? Like we've never had more access to reasons and ways that we can rest, right? And yet at the very same time, we're not resting, right? Like it seems like we've never experienced more burnout in our society, more depression, more anxiety, and maybe even more suicide than ever before. And so it feels like we're living in the midst of this paradox. At one end, we know how to rest, but we're not actually resting. We're running 1,000,000 miles a moment, and we end up just screaming out, man, why can I not find rest? Right? Ever been there? And I think, now, whenever we want to discover the secret behind the skill, if there's ever a skill that we want to master, the best way to go about that is to find somebody who has really discovered the secret of it and get some FaceTime with them or get to know them and try and discover the secret behind the skill, right? Like if we wanted to learn how to write an extremely inspirational speech that would change history, and we could go back in time and sit down for coffee with Martin Luther King Jr., we'd do it, right? Or if you wanted to be like the best artist of all time and you could get some FaceTime with someone like Leonardo da Vinci, like you would do it, right? Or if you wanted to learn how to be like the best college football team of all time, then you would track down the Ohio State Buckeyes and not the Michigan Wolverines, am I right? Yeah, good. Glad we're on the same page. Just want to make sure we're in friendly territory right here. Right? Like we always want to find the master to discover the secret behind the skill. And I don't know about you, but I personally have just never discovered anybody who seemed to have mastered the skill of rest quite like Jesus Christ of Nazareth, right? I mean, like he mastered this skill. Like this individual, he was a pretty like radically influential person, right? Like Time magazine literally declared that he has been the most influential person that ever have lived. Like he started a movement thousands of years ago that we're literally sitting in right now. I mean, he would do miracles and he healed people. Like he accomplished a whole lot in his life. And yet at the very same time, scripture tells us this chronicle of his life tells us about time after time after time when he would retreat, when he would have times of quiet and solitude. And it's like his life was characterized by this rest, by this like inner peace and groundedness. And so it makes me think that there's something that Jesus knew about rest that we don't seem to know. Right? Like surely there's something that Jesus knew about this whole idea of resting that we don't seem to know. And today I want to dive into maybe just a little bit of what that was. We're going to do that by diving into Matthew chapter 10. Now, what you need to know is that if you kind of flip back before Matthew chapter 10 to Matthew chapter 4, that's like in the very beginning when Jesus is starting to like pursue his disciples, to invite these young guys onto his world-changing team. And that's like really the epic part of the story, right? Like as Jesus is walking up to these young guys in all these different locations with all these different occupations, he's like going up to them, and that's like pretty epic. Like if this was a movie called Jesus and the Disciples, that would be like the climax of the movie, right? Like that would be the moment when like the disciples are like getting out of their boats, like they're leaving behind their tax collector booth, right? And they're like in slow motion, right? Like their hair is like blowing in the wind. They got some swagger around them, right? Like they are excited at that moment. Like that's the exciting part of the story. And at that point, I would bet that they're thinking in their minds, like the disciples are like, okay, I'm getting out of my boat to follow Jesus. Like this could be a pretty cool life for me. Like this could be pretty exciting. This could be kind of glamorous. Like, yo, this could bring some fame for me. This could bring some notoriety. Like this could be a pretty cool life. And I think all of us do this with new things, right? Like whether it was that job you had that you were convinced was like your dream job was gonna be the best thing ever. And then like 6 months in, you're sending out your resumes again, right? Or maybe it was college. Then in the beginning you thought it was gonna be so fun, but you're halfway through and you're like, wow, this is way harder than I ever expected. Maybe it was a relationship, or maybe it was parenting, or maybe it was a vacation. Like in the beginning you thought this is gonna be amazing, but then as you get a little bit deeper, it's not bad. It just gets a little bit more real, right? And that's where we find the disciples in Matthew chapter 10. Everything starts getting just a little bit more real. So Matthew chapter 10, here's what's happening. Here's the context. We have Jesus, right? And he has his team of 12 world changers. And there are these young guys, right? And they're from all different socioeconomic levels and backgrounds and jobs. And so he has his team, these young guys in their late teens and early 20s. He gathers them in a circle. He says, hey, huddle up. Like, come on over. I have something to tell you. And he brings them into the circle and he says, hey, I am about to send you out. Like, I'm going to send you out into different communities. And this is really significant because this is the first time Jesus ever chooses to actually send his disciples out on their own to preach a message of truth and love and restoration and redemption. So this is a big deal. So Jesus is bringing them in this huddle. He's like, okay. Like, I'm about to send you out. Maybe the disciples are kind of excited, like a trip, like woohoo, like this is going to be fun, right? But then everything starts getting just a little bit more real. Here's what it says in Matthew chapter 10. Jesus starts off by saying, hey, stay alert. Okay, time out. Like if this was the first thing that a leader that you were following on a trip told you before they sent you out, like I think I'd be a little bit concerned, right? It's not like, yo, this is gonna be so fun. It's not like, hey, you're gonna get some really good pictures. No, Jesus says, stay alert. He goes on. He says, this is hazardous work I'm assigning to you. You're going to be like sheep running through a wolf pack, so don't call attention to yourself. Be as cunning as a snake and offensive as a dove, and don't be naive, because some people will impugn your motives and others will smear your reputation just because you believe in me, so don't be upset. When they haul you before the civil authorities without knowing it, they've done you and me a favor, giving you a platform for preaching the kingdom news. And don't worry about what you'll say or how you'll say it. The right words will be there. The Spirit of your Father will supply the words. And when people realize it is the living God you're presenting and not some idol that makes them feel good, they are going to turn on you, even people in your own family. There is great irony here, proclaiming so much love, experiencing so much hate. But don't quit. Don't cave in. It is all well worth it in the end, because it is not success you were after in such times, but survival. So be survivors. Okay, so I don't actually think the Bible's meant to just be read and like put back in the shelf, or like skimmed on your Bible app and like click that blue check mark and you're out, right? Like, no, I think it's meant to be experienced. Like, I love to imagine, man, what would it have been like to be there in that huddle, in that moment, right? So you're this young dude, you're in this huddle with Jesus, and the first thing he says is like, yo, be stay alert. And then he ends by, hey, be survivors. And I have to imagine, like at that point, the disciples, they kind of like walk away from Jesus and they like have their own huddle, like over here, right? And they're like, yo, like, what have we gotten ourselves into? Right? Like at this point, they're like, this isn't exactly what I expected when I got out of my boat and my hair was blowing in the wind, right? Like this isn't totally what I thought it would be like to follow Jesus. And I have to be honest, friends, like I don't know. If I was in that circle that day, I don't know if I would have went. But these young guys, these disciples, they went. They went where they knew they would be terrorized, abused, and persecuted for all of the goodness they were trying to do. They went where they knew they would be run out of town and brought to the authorities, all while their names and reputations were dragged through the dirt. They went where they knew they would be pouring themselves out for the sake of Jesus. They went where they knew they would be asked to sacrifice everything for the cause of Christ. And when I read this passage, I don't know why, but I never can stop thinking about the meeting that happened after the trip. Like, what did that look like when they got back? What would that have been like? And I don't know why, but I always picture the disciples are coming back and Jesus is like hanging out underneath this tree. I picture he's like leaning up against the trunk as one by one the disciples trickle back into town. And Jesus like waves them over and they come and they collapse in the dust at the feet of Jesus. And eventually they all arrive home. And as they're sitting in this circle at the feet of Jesus, it's quiet. Like I imagine no one is speaking. They're too tired to speak. They're too exhausted to even think of finding a meal. They're too discouraged to look at each other. I imagine that they're trying to sit in a way that doesn't aggravate the bruises on their body. I imagine that they're holding their heads, leaning them against their knees, trying to block out the ringing of the accusations and the shouts of the authority. I imagine there are tears hanging in their eye as they think about all of the bruises and the abuse they experience. I imagine they're looking at the bodies of their brothers and grieving over the injuries they see on them. And I imagine they are discouraged from day after day after day of failure. And I have to imagine it's around this point when they're wondering, man, what is Jesus going to say about this? Like, is Jesus going to shame me? Is Jesus going to be upset with me? Is Jesus going to be angry at the failure I received? And slowly they begin to lift their gaze up to the face of Jesus. And Jesus looks at this circle of beaten, bruised, young world changers. And just one chapter later in Matthew 11, Scripture tells us what Jesus told his disciples. He says, hey, are you tired? Think the disciples were tired? It says worn out, burnt out on religion. Hey, come to me. Get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. And this passage, it feels like this poetic, beautiful tribute to rest, right? But at the same time, for all of the times we quote this verse, right, and it's fairly quotable, for all the times we retweet it, for all the times we write it in a scripty font on that chalkboard in our living room, for all the times we post it on our mirror in our bathroom, for all the times we talk about that verse, it seems that we're still missing something because we're still not resting, right? And so tomorrow morning, we'll still wake up and we'll engage in the same exact kind of life we've always lived, dictated by to-do lists and things we think we should do and expectations of the world. We'll make sure we get at every church event that we should be at, and we'll do everything for everyone that we should be doing and make sure to check off every single item on our to-do list. And then we'll find ourselves completely drained, completely exhausted for all the things we should do. And so we'll be so tired, we'll say, whoa, time out, I need to rest. And so we will. We'll grab our coffee and our Bible and we'll cuddle up with a warm cup of coffee, right? And we'll rest. We'll get our self-care time. And it will feel so good, right? Except it won't. Because in the back of our mind, what's still happening is we're still thinking through our to-do list and all of the expectations we have on ourselves and all the things we should do. And so in reality, we're not experiencing any sort of real soul level kind of rest. So we find ourselves caught in this vicious cycle, screaming out, man, why can I not find rest? And here's what I'm thinking about these days, friends, is maybe the problem is not that we're resting wrong. Maybe the problem is that we're living wrong, right? Because we know how to rest. Like, we know that it's good to read our Bible, and we know it's good. We have all the 4-step process from our bloggers telling us how to rest. So maybe the problem is not that we're resting wrong. What if the problem is that we are living wrong? See, sometimes we say to an overly apathetic culture, yo, just rest. Like Jesus said it was important. But we never seem to clarify what kind of life the disciples were living that would demand such intentional times of rest. Because the reality is, the disciples weren't tired because their to-do list was too long. The disciples weren't tired because they had scheduled too many coffees with friends that week. The disciples weren't tired because their college courses were too hard. The disciples weren't tired because their work deadlines were closing in, or because there were too many church events to attend, or because they had stayed out too late partying on the weekend, or because they had volunteered for too many Sundays in a row. No, the disciples were tired because they were out in their community sacrificing everything, giving themselves away. They were out in their community getting up close to the ostracized and the sick and the forgotten and the ill. They were walking for miles on dusty roads in order to see people and preach to them and give them the message of Jesus. The disciples, they weren't tired from some small, mundane kind of life. The disciples were tired from changing the world. Are we? You see, I think so often we're asking the wrong kinds of questions. I'm asking the wrong kinds of questions. So maybe the question we shouldn't just be asking is, am I resting? Maybe the question we need to be asking is, what am I resting from? Maybe it's not just, am I resting? Maybe the question is, what am I resting from? Because here's the truth, friends. Here's the truth. If we aren't living lives that are centered on sacrifice, then no amount of rest will ever revive a soul that is longing to come alive. If our lives are empty and meaningless and safe and ordinary, no amount of rest will ever rejuvenate our soul. If we're exhausted from things that won't matter at the end of our lives, then no amount of rest will ever restore our souls. We only experience true rest, true rejuvenation, true revival in our souls when we rest from living lives of sacrifice. So often, I have the honor and the privilege to sit in coffee shops across from young leaders, and they'll say things like, Hannah, I'm just so exhausted. And that's so real, and so I grieve that with them. But then they also say, Hannah, my life has never felt more meaningless or passionless or purposeless. And so I start to ask them just a few questions. I say, okay, well, hey, who are you investing in these days? And they say, Hannah, like I would love to invest in some people. Like I would love to mentor others, but you don't seem to understand, like with the length of my to-do list, like I just don't have margin in my life to invest in others right now. And I say, okay, that's fine. Well, who are the people that are investing in your life? And they say, Hannah, gosh, like I would love to have a mentor pouring into my life, but I don't think you understand, like with all of the things that I feel like I should do, like I just don't think I also have time to really invest well in that mentorship relationship. And I'm like, okay, yeah, great. Well, how are you fighting for justice these days? And they say, Hannah, if you saw my calendar, and you saw all the small groups I've had and the Bible studies I'm in and all the books I'm reading about Jesus, you would know I don't have time to go out into community and actually be Jesus to others. I'm sorry. I say, okay. Well, hey, what are you doing that makes your soul come alive these days? And they look back at me with a blank stare. They say, Hannah, I would love to do things that set my soul on fire. But like, I don't even have time to do the things that I think I should be doing as a good Christian. So surely I don't have time to do things that set my soul on fire. And then I realized in that moment that we're not tired because we're too busy. I think we're tired from living lives that feel small and mundane and ordinary. And that deep in our center, we are longing to live a life of sacrifice. The question, it can't just be, am I resting? No. the question must also be, what am I resting from? Because there are things that we were born to do. So let's not stop doing them. And like we can actually keep going to that part of town where there's a lot of homeless people and showing up consistently and creating relationships with the people there. We can actually keep going to the basketball games of the young men and women we mentor. We can actually continue to advocate for the rights of people that don't have the voice to do it. We can actually keep showing up in the lives of people that need us. We can actually keep showing up for the refugee family in our community. We can actually keep serving at church. We can actually keep spending time with people that don't know Jesus, because this is what we were born to do. And we can keep loving our families faithfully. We can keep showing up for our friends. We can keep creating deep, authentic relationships. We can keep crafting real community, because this is what it feels like to be human. And then we can keep singing, and we can keep creating, and we can keep dreaming and exploring, because this is what makes our souls come alive. And we need your soul to be alive in this world. And then we can collapse at the feet of Jesus, a little tired, maybe exhausted and worn out, wondering if it's all worth it. And we can listen to the voice of Jesus as he looks us in the eye and said, hey, now it's time to rest. Sleep, take a deep breath, steep your soul in my presence, rest, and then wake up tomorrow morning and keep fighting for justice. Keep living out your purpose. Keep loving people. Keep speaking out for truth. Friends, let's not rest from an empty life of mediocrity. Instead, let's rest from the life that we were born to live. Let's say yes to Jesus' invitation to go, and then we can say yes to Jesus' invitation to rest. And when we do, we'll discover we are no longer trying to prove that we're busy, to justify our exhaustion or defend our overwhelmed soul. Instead, we'll sit down and we'll know that Jesus is whispering to our souls, hey, thank you for saying yes to my calling on your life. Now, my child, it's time to rest. And Jesus, we know that we are on this earth for a purpose that is so much greater than ourselves. God, when you sent out the 12 disciples, you were sending them on a mission to do your work, to build your kingdom, to spread love and truth. And God, we want to do that too. And we understand, God, that we might get a little beat up in the process. We might get tired. We might feel exhausted. And God, in those moments, after we have sacrificed and poured ourselves out and built your kingdom, God, may we come back to you and collapse at your feet and hear those words. Well done, my child. Now, it's time to rest. In Jesus' name.